then we will be punished forever for not being gullible enough. That is what Revelations is saying, right?
Jack, do you want to answer that before Thunder comments?
There's obviously I don't share his assumption about the book of Revelation, right? So he has a perspective and he's entitled to it. I mean, he believes that, you know, being a Christian is something for gullible people, and he's entitled to that. I disagree.
You are expected to believe on
faith. I don't expect anyone to be gullible, and I think I don't need to counter what Aaron Ross says. I simply need to demonstrate in my own life that I am not the sort of individual that Aaron Ross attempts to characterize Christians as. So,
okay, Thunder.
Yeah, I mean, I just really have to ask whether we're reading the same book of Revelations here. I mean, this idea that you have to, there's a message of love and whatever. This is Jesus in Revelations. I will kill her children with death, and all the churches shall know that I am he who searches minds and hearts, and I will give each one according to your works. And this is completely divergent interpretation from the Christianity as a works righteous system. All you have to do is accept Jesus and your works don't matter. It says in Revelations, Jesus says in Revelations, that I will give each according to your own. I mean, this is no different than you saying, well, Harold Camping has got didn't take account of this part of the Bible. Everyone just picks and chooses what they want from the Bible. And that's why when I actually take a look at Revelations, to me, this is indistinguishable. If you were to actually get two accounts, say one of someone who was whacked out of their gourd on psychedelic drugs and who has written down their description of it, and secondly, the book of Revelations, and you were to give those to some person who has no idea that one comes from the Bible, the two would be indistinguishable, right? And in that sense, that is what that is the value of metrics of the metric of value of the book of Revelations, right?
Oh, I mean, once again, you're taking a very antagonistic approach to this book. And what's interesting is you don't have to. I mean, certainly there are people who are not Christian who approach the book of Revelation from the lens of it being literature of antiquity. And that is an approach that I certainly can appreciate and value when individuals do that. You don't. I mean, you obviously have a very antagonistic sense of the book of Revelation, which doesn't, to me, demonstrate your willingness to engage in the fact that we are dealing with literature of antiquity. And sure, we can try to compare it with someone tripped out on psychedelic drugs, or we can just take it on its own worth and merit and address it from that context, along with the context of other literature of antiquity, and go about examining it and determining what, if any, sort of what meaning can we extrapolate from what's being presented in it, as opposed to trying to compare it to some dude tripped out on psychedelic drugs, which, on a side point, your hair doesn't really, I mean, speaking of psychedelic.
All right, now you did say that we were taking an antagonistic stance against a book threatening to torture us forever if we don't believe it. I mean, that is really the way you described it, right? I don't want to be mischaracterizing. You are talking about a book that, yes or no, threatens to punish me forever simply for not believing it, right?
I'm saying, what I said was, a person can approach this from the perspective of it being literature of antiquity. And you approach it, I mean, yes, it says things about judgment regarding all people, including the Christians. It's not exclusive to non-believers. The book is written, bear in mind, directly to the Christians. And the message it has for Christians is beyond harsh in many ways. It is not, let me just say this. The book of Revelation does not reinforce the American dream that so many Christians strive for, to have the nice house, you know, the cool looking car, and just to live this life of peace and prosperity. The book of Revelation doesn't support that. So it's not just against, you know, non-believers in the sense. It's against sort of anyone who decides to place something above the lordship of Christ, Now,
So you're saying
that's the theological idea behind it. Now, you can, as an individual, just as I can as an individual, we can read it through the lens of, okay, sure, we understand what it's saying there in terms of meaning, but I can still be intellectually honest in terms of trying to understand the context and the environment and the audience of whom the writing is being written to.
Okay, so regardless what lens you prefer to imagine that you may or may not be using, and I prefer not to use a lens at all, I'm going to be very broad and objective about it. It occurs to me that there is no option wherein an unbeliever cannot be punished strictly for being an unbeliever. All sins will be forgiven if you believe. But the only thing that will not be forgiven, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the only thing that will not be forgiven is unbelief. Right?
To ask, in Christianity, do I hold the position that in order to commune with God, one has to desire to commune with God? I would say yes.
Was that a yes or a no? I got confused.
I would say this. Aaron Ra, if your desire in life is to be in the presence of God, and you realize this revelation is given through Christ, well, then you can have what you desire. If you don't desire that, well, then you will get what you don't desire. I mean, you will get what you desire, which is to not be with God. So in other words, if you want to be with God and you accept this revelation he's given us through Christ, then you will be with God. If you don't want to be with God, well, then you won't be with God. I mean, you will get what you want either way, I guess.
Okay.
Right, can I just pause you? Can I pause you there, because we have had the first caller in the room for a while who's been waiting patiently. And he raised a topic which we've somewhat moved away from, which is why I brought him in. Before I ask him to give us his question, can anyone tell me how I unblock someone on Skype? Because Warrior Christian is trying to add me as a contact, and he was blocked after the last show. If someone knows how to unblock someone, send me a... actually, I better close a few windows. Send me a PM through Blog TV, and we'll get Warrior Christian on in due course.
Actually, can I briefly tie up a last point, DPR?
Yeah, if you can, because as I say, we've got to have Marcus waiting.
It is very brief. I've got it to jot it down here. And that's what you were saying earlier, Jack, that I look like a hippie. Well, that's fine. But content is everything. What I look like doesn't actually matter when you're considering what I say. And similarly, when you're looking at the Bible, you're interested in content. And if the content is indistinguishable from someone on a drug trip, then what is its actual legitimate context? What is its legitimate meaning? The fact that it's a book of antiquity is utterly irrelevant for the content. The interpreting it as literature, fine if you want to do it, but that has no relevance to its content, and its content is indistinguishable from a drug trip.
Please.
Okay, Marcus, are you with us?
Can I respond to that quickly, actually, please?
Sure.
You say a lot. I mean, you make a lot of assumptions, first of all, regarding what someone on a drug trip is capable of producing, because we obviously know that someone can be strung out and produce some amazing work, whether it's art, whether it's music, whether it's literature. So I don't see how just because someone's strung out on drugs, this means that they are going to produce something that
it's about the content.
Exactly.
And the content of Revelations is just random and crazy stuff.
When Thunderfoot, I completely understand why anyone who picks up the Bible and reads something about rivers of blood and a third of this and a third of that are going to think to themselves, what the hell is this? What is this? This is just complete and utter BS. I can't get anything from this. I understand that. And I understand that's the case because we are talking about literature of antiquity, and it uses imagery and a way of communicating that is very often distinct from the way we communicate and distinct from the sort of imagery that we use. So to me, yes, if one does not understand the context, the culture, and the language of the time of this writing, then they will see little content. And by content, what I mean is they will see little of meaning that is applicable to themselves or applicable to anything else. But if one understands the context, the language, and the environment, I believe they will be able to see much more in terms of content as a result.
All right, I'm going to insist now that we take the first call. Marcus, welcome to the show. I hope you can. I hope you're with us still.
I am. Can you hear me?
Very well.
All
How
right.
can we help you?
Basically, I just wanted to know how Jack goes about distinguishing the truth of one faith claim over another. It just seems to me that there's no way to actually make a real distinction once you accept something on faith. There's no way to say, I am right, Harold Cumping's wrong, Islam is wrong, or Buddhism is wrong. Once you say evidence need not apply, how do you distinguish truth from fantasy?
Jack, I think that was directed at you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I get it quite a bit. Generally speaking, within the various religious frameworks, we have certain sort of foundational beliefs that, for example, let me give you an example with regards to Islam. I can engage in a conversation regarding the truth claims of Christianity versus Islam with a Muslim. I've done it before. And of course, oftentimes we agree to disagree, but nonetheless, there are still elements that even though both of us believe in God, there are elements within Christianity and Islam that provide venues for us to debate on them and to argue and to determine the validity of whichever perspective we're taking. So, for example, why I'm not a Muslim, because I studied Islam a little bit and I was actually interested in becoming a Muslim at one point, was because Islam, which was established 600 years after Christianity, that's when Muhammad showed up at least, doesn't believe that Christ was crucified and rose again, although they do believe that Christ was a prophet. They do believe Christ performed miracles. They do believe Christ was even born a virgin birth. So because they grant so many assertions that are very similar to the assertions Christians have, this actually provides sort of a framework by which I can address Muslims and say, well, actually, I believe there are sufficient grounds, given that you grant this, sufficient grounds for me to assert that Christ actually was crucified and risen again. That is not the sort of approach I would take, for example, with talking with an atheist, but in the context of a Muslim, there is a meaningful conversation to be had there.
I think we may have lost the caller. So if either Owen or Thunder wants to say something.
Well, I'd love to jump in on that one. I mean, one of the first things that I had when people were started to teach me about Christianity as a very small child was explaining to me how Jesus had to come and be killed in order to forgive us for wanting to know the difference for right and wrong, because we were punished for not knowing the difference, or we were punished for finding out the difference of right and wrong when we couldn't know the difference for right and wrong. And because of that, Jesus had to come down or God had to manufacture a hand puppet for himself to send to the earth to be crucified by us. And only when we did something that was unforgivable could he forgive us for a situation he made inevitable. Now, mind you, this is the mind of an 8-year-old listening to the story and realize that there's not a part of this that makes any sense. Now, I haven't been able to get to a point in my life where it did make any sense. There's no point at which God needs to have us kill him so that he can forgive us for wanting to know right from wrong. If you look back at that story, it is so obviously a parable. I mean, when they use the fruit of the tree of in any other portion of the Bible, in every other instance that parable is used, it is known that it is a parable, except in Genesis. That's the one time that it's taken as a literal interpretation. Why is that? It obviously did not happen. There was no time when Christ had to come to earth to be killed. God could have forgiven us if we had ever done anything wrong. I'm sorry. I know that you want to cast me as somebody that is just trying to characterize Christians some other way. I'm not. I've had many, many discussions with these people. I've had people share their beliefs with me, why they believe. I believe because I need to believe. I believe because I want to believe. I believe because I have this in my life. Never because of a reason that could make any sense, even in the mind of an 8-year-old. I'm sorry to seem so hostile with it, but there's just no part of that can be rationalized.
It does seem a rather